Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're back with another special segment of our new thing, special sequence series, limited edition, whatever you want to call it, Extremely Strained and Incredibly Forced, the show where we search for meaning and connection where maybe there isn't any. So it's a new thing we're trying out, but basically we bring in guests to pitch us their receptions and hot takes and whatever is sort of in their brains at the moment. Today we're joined by a wonderful new guest, Max Paule, joining us from Earlham College. Welcome, Max. Really excited to have you on the show.
Yay. Excited to be here. No one told me that it was called Extremely Strained and Incredibly Forced.
Did I not mention that in the email?
I don't think we did, but I'm here for it. It sounds amazing.
That's good. As long as, well, I mean, the show, the other premise is that it's kind of a who gotcha, moment where we lead them in, and the hidden cameras are like, aha, look who's been surprised. But yeah, so Max, you were one of our first respondents, I think, and you had a very specific take about. Well, I won't say more. Actually, I'll let you sort of do the talking.
Wow. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Excellent. So, and you should all feel free to just stop me at any point if I mention a thing that you're like, what's going on here?
Yeah. And we will. Also, FYI, we are also the reception police. So if you say something out of the line, the sirens go off and the reception police come and take you to jail.
This is every graduate student's nightmare.
It really is.
I'm going to be the nice reviewer because I've seen one episode.
Oh, good.
I'm the student that did not do their homework for this assignment. So.
No, that's good. Okay. So my basic premise is that The Walking Dead is like a remake of an adaptation of Vergil's Aeneid, which is sort of the major Roman epic that we've got. So quick show of hands. How many of you have actually read the Aeneid? Hey,
I mean, we're raising our hands.
Hey, excellent. We got 3 for 3.
I'm teaching the in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. We won't assume the audience is really up on their Roman epics though. So we'll hit some basic summary here. But yeah, so we'll start big and then we'll go small. But my basic idea here is that the first half of the Aeneid is Vergil riffing on Homer, where he's like, all right, cool. I'm going to have my hero, Aeneas. He's going to leave the destruction of his whole world. He's going to leave the fall of Troy. And he's going to try to sail around the Mediterranean, desperately searching for home, someplace that he and everyone who has survived the collapse of Troy can just go and live. But, there are hostile Greeks everywhere. So for the first 6 books of this 12-book epic, it is Aeneas and his crew being like, all right, cool. Can we live in Thrace? Can we stop our search for home and just live in Thrace? And Thrace is weird. There's a guy who's been turned into a bush and it's bleeding. We can't stay there. All right, next, we'll go to Delos. How about that? You can't stay in Delos. Here's an oracle, but you can't stay here. All right, how about we can go to Crete? All right, Crete looked good. Crete looked really good. They stopped. They're like, all right, we're going to establish laws. We're going to start farming. And then plague hits. All right, we can't stay in Crete. That's no good. They go to several other places. We got Harpies in this place. We got Cyclopes over here. None of this works. Finally, they make their way to North Africa, and they're like, thank God there's a city. It's just here. We can hang out in the North African city of Carthage and just be cool for a while. And of course, that doesn't work either. And eventually, they have to make their way to Italy. Fine. So that's the first half of the Aeneid for those of us who haven't just read it recently. And that's also The Walking Dead seasons 1 through 5. So instead of the Trojan War, you've got a zombie outbreak. Fine. And instead of a citizen soldier that is Aeneas, you've got the closest modern approximation, which is a police officer in Rick Grimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that. I want to circle back around to that. For sure.
That's fine.
Aeneas the cop.
Aeneas the cop.
Mm-hmm. But the first 5 seasons is just the zombies survivor crew being like, all right, can we live in a convoy of cars? No, you cannot live in just a trailer. That's not going to work. All right, we'll go to a farm. Is the farm going to work? No, the farm is not going to work.
The farm almost stops the show dead in its tracks.
Yeah. Let's maybe go to a jail. I'm like, all right, neat. We got a jail. The jail is awesome. The jail does not work for a couple of reasons. But just like when you had Aeneas and his crew on Crete, they're like, all right, we can farm. We watch We watch zombie apocalypse survivors farm and raise pigs, and then disease breaks out. And they're like, oh, I guess this isn't going to work. We also get the enemy, right? The other town of Woodbury, led by the evil governor. They stage like another sort of Trojan War because they besiege the jail, and then they send in a Trojan horse style bread truck to breach the walls. And instead of Greeks coming out of this Trojan horse, it's zombies. So definitely a callback to the Trojan War there. I will hear nothing against it. Also,
the faint sound of sirens I hear.
Yeah, look. It's fine. It's completely sound.
Yeah.
We've also got a nod to the Cyclops because the governor of Woodbury loses an eye and wanders around with an eye patch, just like Big Dan Teague in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Is a clear nod to the Cyclops. And then we end up finally in the small walled city that looks like it could be home. This one named Alexandria, another North African city that seems like it could offer respite to our folks. So that is the big, the overarching theme of what's going on here. After that, so after we've closed off sort of the Odyssean half of the Aeneid, then it flips over into the Iliad, when it's just warfare constantly. And I will admit, I've stopped watching after like season 7, but I think we're wrapping season 11 now. But as far as I can, it's absurd, absolutely absurd. I kind of wanted to be like, wait, did you guys make 12 episodes? Did you do 12 episodes, like 12 books of the Aeneid? Is this the thing you did?
And then we can count the spin-off series as one, and so there's
okay.
Yeah,
done.
That's your Ovid.
No, that's like your Homeric hymns almost, right? They have like little like mini storylines, and they're kind of aimed at different like groups, right? There's like a whole YA one, right, where it's like a bunch of teenagers that are all just like kicking about. Maybe that. I don't know.
Completely.
I've really lost track of all of the spin-offs.
It seems like there are a lot. But my baseless claim is that it starts to look a lot like the Iliadic half, when essentially you've got Aeneas versus Turnus. And you're just dealing with different warring factions. I want to say the advertisement for either season 8 or season 9 was essentially Rick Grimes versus Negan. And it was like, it's all out war. And it's like, yeah. This is the Iliadic half of the Aeneid. I don't need to watch this. Like, one of you is going to die. It's going to be fun. Who's to say? I don't know. I have not watched.
Well, I think interestingly enough, I read a lot of spoilers. I have only watched season 1 of The Walking Dead, but I read quite a lot of spoilers. And I know that Rick Grimes dies, or appears to die.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
And that he actually has a moment where he could kill Negan, but doesn't.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So he like makes the choice that Aeneas does not. And Aeneas, famously has this like rage, and he kills Turnus at the end. So I think
spoilers.
I'm sorry, spoilers. I'm just way into spoilers here.
This all sounds plausible. What's the white stag? What is the white stag of the story that starts the battle?
Yeah, right.
I wanted to even take a step back because we actually it just came out, but we've had, this is the second of 2 Aeneid reception works for fielding. The first one being Moana, where the sort of initial premise for that one is boats. That's kind of our buy-in. And I love that for you, the buy-in is farming. So we really come full. We've got it's the shield of Achilles, right? We've got the whole world. No, but I like that. It almost like neatly divides down the middle, like you said, right? Or like, 5 books of 5 seasons of. I haven't gotten past the governor. I'm still in the prison.
Sure.
And we talked about this kind of a little bit. We can turn, but just like the larger theme of like finding a home in the wake of a disaster. And in the ancient world, the disaster is usually destruction, like war, destruction, sacking of a city, something like that. And for the modern, and I think this speaks to sort of where we're at in the world, but like the modern destruction is not, it's not like Red Dawn where like the Russians or whoever it is like comes in and takes over. The destruction is an ecological one, ecological / epidemic.
Sure.
It's somewhere in there. And then so a total societal collapse. And then how do you find a home, and wandering and all the fake out homes and the inevitable conflict, which is kind of the bread and butter of any good zombie story. the zombies are never the villain, right? They're always more set
This
dressing.
is always my point. Yeah, it's like
Mm-hmm.
the zombies become almost like a natural disaster. They are just some sort of inevitable thing that you have to deal with. And it's always your fellow man that is the real villain.
Yes.
And I think that is so, like, you know, there's so many, you know, monsters and, you know, supernatural characters in different types of mythology and also in the Aeneid. And there are, you know, vengeful gods and all of that stuff. But like ultimately, it's like people killing other people.
Yeah,
It's people.
Even
always
for
people.
the sort of source material for Virgil, right? For Odysseus, like, yeah, there's Polyphemus, the Cyclops, there's Scylla, there's Charybdis, there's that thing. But really, the ultimate enemy for him is the suitors in his house, and it's kind of the same with Aeneid or Aeneas, where it's Turnus, right? Turnus is the big bad. The other, you know, and the kind of it's the man who would be king, because that's really what they're fighting for. It's who gets to marry Lavinia and be king of the Latins or
Right.
the Italians or whoever it is.
Can we circle back to Aeneas as a cop? I want to dive in on this because I'm so intrigued.
Say more.
I'm just trying to think of like the Homeric hero-esque or the Vergilian hero, I guess, as this like character that is terribly flawed, but that we still kind of root for.
Sure.
And I'm like now trying to picture like Aeneas is like somebody in like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is like a cop that I would root for.
Sure.
It's like a very like comedic turn of the character, and I have never seen Aeneas like that. And now I'm trying to picture like a comedic Aeneas.
Oh yeah, I don't think a comedic Aeneas is there. No. I mean, we could do it, but like we'd have to work real hard.
We'd have to work real hard.
Yeah,
well, it's a lot of baggage on that one.
So much baggage. So I wasn't planning to get into this because this is
okay. We don't have to.
No. Let's go.
Okay.
Leave it in. We don't edit anything out of this show. It's all
amazing. So there's this great article that I don't have in front of me now, but it did this delightful analysis of The Walking Dead in terms of police officers. And I think this gets us at the duality of Aeneas that you were talking about, where like he's like this founder of Rome, but also like a deeply flawed character.
Yes.
And this article is like, all right, cool. The Walking Dead is doing this sort of interesting amalgamation of zombie show plus Western. And they tied in the Western with like just so many folks on horses riding around. And they're like, all right, the basic premise of a Western is that law has come into a lawless land. And you are going to have a sheriff who is going to tame this land that is chaotic, and it needs, right, the strong patriarchal hand that wields the law. That's the Western genre.
Yeah.
But then there's zombie flicks, which are generally like, do not trust authority. The police or the military or the government, those are not your friends. And so you've got at the heart of The Walking Dead this police officer, and you're like, wait, is Rick bringing law? Do we want the law that Rick is bringing? Right? Like, it is a really smart article.
Because I think it's when they get to Alexandria where they kind of start setting up like he redons the police uniform and it's about him. But then it's like, is he a policeman like we sort of want, or is he just this kind of Judge Jury? Is he a Judge Dredd figure who's just out there executing people? And later, I think there's a season where there is a cop group. I think it's in season 6. And there's like these cops at a hospital who are like kidnapping people and or not kidnapping, but they're running this sort of there's a struggle between Rick and the cops.
This, yes.
But one thing was like my sort of the analogy I think, Eli, that's like we're kind of getting at is like the sort of ancient analogy to the cop for the Homeric world is the king, right? Somebody who brings the law, enforces the law, enacts the law, right? And that's what Aeneas is. He's a king, but the other thing is kings are sort of one way in Homer, but between Homer and Virgil, there's a whole long tradition of people basically in one way, shape, or form asking, are kings a good idea? And usually that answer ends up being no. The Romans themselves have a sort of pretty negative view towards kings, or they will at least adopt a king in all but name.
Well, interesting then that this is the time period Virgil is writing in is,
Mhm.
a very Augustan time period, which is,
Yeah.
is it propagandistic? Is it
The whole kind of
slightly
flavor.
dissing? Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole like kind of flavor for a lot of like Roman writers meditating on Augustus and his progeny is like, I mean, I'm thinking particularly of the historian Tacitus, who says something to the effect that like, yes, we were giving up our freedom, but everybody was just so tired of the chaos that came before Augustus, 100 years of civil war, give or take, insecurity, political infighting, just kind of, the calendar was a month out of date. Like it was just nuts. Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria.
And everybody was just so tired of all that they would accept a tyrant, basically, or Augustus, who's more or less fine, but then his weirdo nephews and their children who get odder and odder and odder and a little more wild. And that's, again, I think that's the case with characters like the governor or Negan, where like how much freedom and autonomy are we willing to sacrifice to have stability and sort of safety from whatever chaos, war, plague, famine, zombies, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's something else too, like going back to Homer and kings. It's like to be a hero is actually just to be a king. And it's very interesting that comes down to us questioning it today, right? That heroes have a very different connotation, an idea for us of self-sacrifice on the behalf of the good for all. But like it was inherently about nobility before, and that you, because of your nobility, are capable of bringing those things, but it's not through a moral, like, individual.
You just had a cool dad.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, you won the genetic lottery.
Yeah.
That or like Zeus got, some ideas in his head and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, curious about this, not just like kings and leaders and police, but this concept of a hero in general, because as I understand it, of the one episode I've seen, Rick is also the protagonist, or maybe the anti-hero might be
for
the
most
more
of the show. Yeah.
Yeah. So like how does that also complicate our idea of a hero and Aeneas as a hero? Because we are always complaining that these heroes are not actually that heroic.
Yeah. So this totally gets picked up in the conclusion of season 5. I had a list of things we were going to go through, and we were just jumping all over around, and that's totally fine. Great.
No,
Excellent.
yes, that's how we do. We're like, it's like Aeneas in the Mediterranean. We're not going to go right to Italy.
No,
we got to go. We got to stop
No.
around and see some places first.
Yeah. So there's a character named Morgan, and he has hung out with Rick in like season 1. And by season 5, Rick has seen some things. Like he is a changed dude, but we have not really like caught up with Morgan for a while. And this is a character that sort of saw like Rick as he was first realizing, oh God, zombies. So later, when Morgan sees Rick again, like we get to see Rick sort of through fresh eyes and be like, oh, buddy, this is what you've become. And the moment that happens is when, this is again, season finale, there is question of whether Rick should be allowed to remain in this closed community of Alexandria, because it turns out his crew are pretty violent. They have openly discussed just like taking the community for themselves and murdering anyone who gets in their way, because they have been living right out in the wilderness, murdering zombies left and right. And they're like, yeah. Now, if we need this place, we were just going to take it. And through an odd series of events, the leader's husband, so Deanna's husband, ends up getting killed by some dissatisfied resident of Alexandria. As everyone is watching, it's horrific. Or your leader, Deanna, is essentially like, she looks at Rick and is just like, kill him, put him down, because no one else in her community is a murderer. And so Rick is just covered in blood at this point and murders a guy in cold blood right as, again, character from season 1 sees him. And you're like, oh, buddy, like you have definitely gone way too far. And in my mind, this is very much an Aeneas Turnus moment where you're specifically like embodying wrath and sort of righteous fury that's maybe not totally a good thing or something we want Rick / Aeneas to have. And I think introducing that character again, to have you be like, Okay, this is what he is seeing. This is how we are now supposed to be seeing Rick's transformation. And yeah, is this the hero we want? Like, no, I think you might be the bad guys.
I mean, that's a classic hero myth conundrum, right? Of like a guy like Heracles or Odysseus are incredibly useful when you need a monster killed or a city sacked or something like that. But these guys, the things that make them so good at what they do, their violence, their schemes, their ruthlessness, and then when they come home, it sits ill with them, or they can't really fit in super well, because I mean, one of the central problem with the end of the Odyssey is Odysseus has come on and he's murdered the entire, like, a generation of nobility on his island, which is not something that can, like, this aggression cannot stand, man. It's very undue of him, like Rick, and it's like these men, particularly usually men, have a sort of function in conflict, but then when they are rendered functionless, they sort of end up turning against the sort of society, or they become a liability themselves. I'm trying to think of a more apt analogy, but I was like sort of I'm shoehorning in something, but I was at a conference and I was giving a paper about werewolves, and I was kind of talking about werewolves are sort of this. They're like when the man goes feral, right? Or like Plato talks about like when the tyrant, when the leader gets a thirst for blood and he starts killing his own people, then he turns into a tyrant, and he makes an analogy. It's like when people eat human flesh and then turn into wolves. The man into, I don't want to say animal, but sort of alternate, the dark half. I've gone off the rails, but that also I'll yield the floor.
No, I feel like this is also a really interesting like comment on trauma in itself, especially like coming maybe even back to like Vergil himself, who like probably saw a lot of things in his life and had probably a lot of trauma from all the violence that he witnessed, living in a very tumultuous time, and thinking about Aeneas and all of the trauma that this character has gone through, and just sort of the trauma of the Roman state coming out of civil war, like witnessed so many terrible things. And then you think about like how are people supposed to, survive the zombie apocalypse? Is there anybody who like, makes it through, who can survive without like becoming a little bit of a monster themselves? It's like, is this just what trauma is doing to us? Is there an escape from this end to the story?
Building off that, because Vergil, I think, mentions that Aeneas has a moment where he considers showing mercy to Turnus, but then he sees, I can't remember, it was a shield or something belonging to
it's his belt.
Yeah.
It's his belt.
Of one of his comrades that he cared about and saw it, and that's the moment that enrages him. But that's also the moment that we are reminded that at the end of the day, like, this is supposedly a Roman origin story, and yet he's not Roman, and he gives that away through his failure to actually show mercy, because the Roman thing to do would have been to restrain your anger, show mercy, and be the better person.
To spare the conquered, as it were.
Yeah.
I will use that as a delightful segue into other classical allusions. There are a few things you're like, someone is thinking about classics for whatever reason. But right, so in the Aeneid, when Anchises is like, all right, son, let me tell you like what the next generation of Romans is going to be like, he obviously gives the famous line that Romans are supposed to spare the conquered and vanquish the proud. And there is a sign on the Alexandria safe zone that says, mercy for the lost, vengeance for the plunderers.
Ooh.
And you're like, this feels right. It's so good. You're like, I feel like you've been reading your Aeneid. If not, then like it's still a badass line. Congratulations, well done. That was just one of those things. Yeah.
I remember what I was going to say, which is to Eli's point about the people, like, right, is this kind of traumatic experience like ultimately kind of destructive to everybody who touches it? Because in the show seems to kind of, I think, affirm that conclusion, because there's a character, I forget her name, but she's training to be a doctor or something, and like that, and a more sort of holistic or positive, and she's not the only one who has an arc sort of like this, but that they are sort of suddenly and violently killed off in a sort of freak moment, right? And like the characters that try to not be violent murderers end up suffering.
Yeah.
And I think also like the character Carol is kind of like this, where she goes from a sort of a more passive or meek or submissive character to one of the sort of bloodthirstier characters in the main cast.
Born again hard.
And she lives, yeah. So speaking actually of Anchises' prophecy and the idea of, the message for it is there's another element we haven't touched on yet, which I'm sort of surprised, which is the notion of father-son dynamics.
That was point number 2. As I said, we've been sailing all over the Mediterranean.
Beautiful. Then I'll cede the floor, and you can take it away if you got.
Sure. So the second point is that Rick and Aeneas are both family men. 100%. They're defined by their family, right? I mean, we frequently tell students, right? Like, you can spot an Aeneas statue across the room because he's the guy carrying dad and bringing his son along. So Rick doesn't have a father figure. Sorry, doesn't have a father, but gets Herschel, the old man, as a father figure once they go to the jail. Like, he gives him fatherly advice, talks about like how to be a dad. And just like Anchises, who was paralyzed and couldn't walk, Herschel loses his leg and has to walk around with crutches. Don't put any sirens there. That's definitely a tight connection on old men who can't walk. Totally fine. Also, Aeneas's first wife, Creusa, dies, 400 lines into the poem.
Off screen.
But Aeneas then sees her as a ghost. Rick's wife dies, and he sees her as a ghost multiple times. She does not tell him to it's fine, honey, you need to go marry another princess. But still, she does show up as a ghost. And of course, the relationship between Aeneas and his son Ascanius is kind of central to the Aeneid, as Ascanius is obviously sort of going to carry on the torch, the family line, just as Rick needs to be looking after his young son, Carl. We've got this same family structure, very much centered on, Rick as father figure, Aeneas as father figure, guiding the kiddo through the world. Yes. Colin, do you want to jump in on that? Be like, you missed these two?
No, I would say the other, again, kind of maybe this is where I see a diversion or a divert where the sort of, again, the Aeneid, for all of its kind of the hedging, not hedging, or the way it kind of pokes holes a little bit in maybe the idea of Roman sort of supremacy, is that at the end it is kind of affirming to Ascanius does get to found the line that is going to be the Romans and eventually, Julius Caesar and Augustus and all those guys. And but in The Walking Dead, spoilers for those who don't know, but that is sort of cut away, that it's cut out from under Rick, or so Carl doesn't make it.
Wait, when does Carl die? Die?
I want to say it's in season 7 or 8, I think.
I mean, he was never a terribly interesting character.
Yeah,
there is a baby. There is a baby that I, as far as I know, does live. So the thesis is not necessarily destroyed.
No.
Wait, isn't the baby's name like Juliet or Julia or something? Which would be really incredible because the other name for Ascanius, of course, is Iulus.
Yeah.
Which would be really, really funny.
It's Judith.
Judith. Okay, I was so close.
That's biblical. All right.
And she also might be Shane's daughter, I think.
I think she is Shane's daughter.
Okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not technically Rick's daughter.
You know what?
Oh, right. That's right. The other kid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Romans love adopting. It's fine.
That's true. Totally fine. So true.
Yeah, no, Augustus, he was adopted.
Adoption is great. Adoption is great.
In a legal sense.
Yeah. Totes fine. It's
fine.
So I know we talked about the zombies being, not the main antagonists. They're more of a environmental, natural disaster, like obstacle that you're constantly contending with that's bringing out the worst in humanity. But I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are some storylines about a sort of intelligence returning to some of the zombies and that they become more organized.
My knowledge of it is that there are people who can control the zombies. So they don't come back into intelligence. They are just controlled by certain people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe?
Yeah. I have not seen that.
I was curious if that brings in a supernatural element into our story, since we haven't really had a chance to talk about the roles
Yeah.
that the gods play in Aeneas' story as well?
Oof.
And could the zombies function in that way, or do you see different characters functioning in that manner of...
I've got a passing thought, but it's half baked.
My question was half-baked,
Hit
so
me.
have at.
Cool. So, but there is a priest character, which leads me to my other passing observation, which is there's a lot of cast members from The Wire in this show. The priest immediately jumped out to me because he's Carver, but there's a priest character who's kind of he's sort of the worst. Like there's always something shady he's doing. He's kind of feckless. Yeah, as a spiritual leader, there's much to be desired with him. And so I think maybe there's a general, like, if the show is more on the nihilistic or pessimistic side of things, a abandonment of religion seems to be in, or like, that religious leaders are no good, or spiritual leaders are no good. That seems consistent with the general sort of themes of the show.
Yeah.
And but on the flip side, the Aeneid is the main driving force is Aeneas's piety, and I guess this is a big distinction, I guess, that you could see between Rick and Aeneas, because whereas Rick to me seems to have sort of lost faith, sort of construed broadly, however you want to define that, it's the faith that pushes Aeneas to the point even to things that Aeneas doesn't want to do. When he doesn't want to leave Carthage and leave Dido, it's the gods that have to come down and say, like, you got to leave, you got to give Ascanius his kingdom. It's piety. Aeneas in some ways he's sort of driven by his piety, almost a sort of reluctant hero. But I'm not sure how this maps onto Rick or anyone else in the show necessarily.
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer. Great question, Christy, but I don't have a good
Gods
answer
make
for you.
things messy, as we've learned in our
do.
media analysis of a lot of shows.
Let's just take them out. Just do the oh god, what was who directed Troy with Brad Pitt?
Yeah.
Wolfgang Peterson.
Yeah, indeed. just take him out. It's fine.
Check him out.
Right? Like, it's just going to complicate things.
Yeah.
Which I
At
kind
least
of
religion
respect.
was still a component. Like, there was still a
That's true.
belief that the gods were guiding
Yes.
people. But
100%.
And
yeah.
I think it's a fundamental. At the end of the day, also, like, for all the parallels that we are finding between these shows, like, they are the products of different cultures and settings and times, and like our relationship to religion and faith has changed tremendously in the last 2,000 years for all sorts of reasons we can get into, but let's not. But and the role of piety, particularly for Vergil, when Augustus is one of Augustus's main kind of like platforms, such as it is, was a restoration of Roman religion, and like, let's get back to the good old days and get the temples back up and reestablish the priesthoods and get that we lost the faith. Now, I think, in particular, I guess, well, this show sort of debuted in 2010. I think
so. Yeah.
As America, I think, increasingly becomes more, I guess I'll say, at least divided over matters of faith and religion, if not more sort of secular or cynical about it, at least in popular media.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if that's another sort of like reason why we're sort of casting Rick as the cop, or the sheriff is like this sort of, at least in image, a return to the like this middle white America picket fence goodness.
Yeah.
So that, of course, it's the cop. Of course, the symbol of, it's all good. Which, like, whether or not that's what he's actually, trying to promote, it's like the symbol of it all.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think he's a complicated character, as we've talked about. So the show starts in 2010, but I mean, obviously this is based on a graphic novel.
Right.
I don't know
That's
when
true.
the novel started. But
I
yeah,
always
I
forget that it's a graphic novel. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not same. They're definitely diversions. Yeah.
The comics started in 2003, so just shy of a decade prior to the the show does follow the comics fairly closely. They changed some big things, but it's fairly in its broader strokes. It's they're of a piece, I think. Yeah.
Can I ask about a Dido figure? Do we think we have a Dido figure?
This is point number 3.
Tell me more.
So when they go to Alexandria, this walled city, it's run by a former congresswoman named Deanna.
Mm-hmm.
She's Dido. She's Dido 100%. Now, there's not any sort of sexual tension between her and Rick, but Rick does find another woman there to hook up with, right? So we do have a romantic dalliance in the walled city. Deanna at one point writes in Latin. Like, she's making a notation on some map and drops some Ovid, dolor hic tibi prodrit olim. This
God.
This
nice.
pain will be useful to you I don't know, at some point. You're like, okay, thanks for writing that, Deanna. Yeah, so she is very much our Dido figure. She does not end up killing herself, but does end up sacrificing herself, right? So it's not a great connection, but Dido can't live and neither can Deanna.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And nor can they stay in the
Yeah.
walled city of Alexandria, right? It's
Yeah.
ultimately not. Yeah. Yep.
Ah, that's so cool. I like
It's
it.
so cool. Yeah, it's so good.
I had another question, I guess, which I guess is sort of we're getting a little bit about beyond our like my familiarity with the show, but the figure of like we've talked a lot about sort of the Odyssey half, the books 1 through 6, and I guess we've mentioned him, but like the Turnus analogy, which I assume is Negan.
Yeah, that's my assumption.
Yeah, as the antithesis, the nega Aeneid or an Aeneas. I keep doing that, but yeah, like as the sort of rival king or the other sort of and leading a sort of fanatical band of warriors, because Negan's sort of he's running a part town, part cult, part prison, I guess.
And aren't his followers called like the Saviors?
Saviors, yeah. And then there's the Saviors. Then there's another faction called the Kingdom. That's kind of like that's I think kind of like the Evander, like the Greek allies that Aeneas had. Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
So a big part of the later seasons are about Aeneas, or not Aeneas, about Rick. Like they're trying to forge alliances with various sort of groups. And there's another group called the Knights too, I think.
It's 100% the Aeneid, absolutely. And I'm glad that you called Rick Aeneas because sold like that. I've pointed to
yeah, I've already bought in. But yet it's about sort of getting enough allies in order to take out Negan and defeat his sort of group of radicals, and also largely motivated by the death of a comrade, where Negan is, again, spoilers, but his claim to fame was he kills poor Glenn.
Yeah.
Very famously, which is, but yet again, where we diverge, Negan is allowed to live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But perhaps mistakenly, I think. And again, I haven't seen these seasons, but I read about them, and it's like, they have a lot of questions about like, should we have allowed this person to live, and wouldn't it have just been better if we just killed this person? And which again, I think like pulls back to that violence, right? Of like, when is it, who are we now that we can just, execute people and just kill people? And what are we as a society, the judge and execution?
So this raises a question for the group of the sort of thinking about, go back to the Aeneid. What would the Aeneid be like if Turnus lived at the end, right? I mean, it would be a fundamentally different text, I imagine. But like, what would that look like? What do you do? What do you do with Turnus? Is what we call a stumper.
I guess it depends on if he's willing to give up his claim to Lavinia, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and all of this is tied to political alliance through marriage. And I mean, that's the question we have with Homer too, is like, or not Homer, Odysseus, if he'd just shown up and just like, you know what, I'm still alive, so my claim still stands. Do you actually have to punish all of the suitors for assuming you were dead? Or is it actually make more textual sense to allow that generation of nobility to live and cooperate with them? And
if that's even possible.
And I think it's interesting that the show decides to explore the possibility of not returning violence with violence to see if you can break the cycle or the empire without end. And
maybe they also just wanted a popular villain to still be a popular villain because capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's money in the bank, right? Well, the other thing is just the reality of the show is sometimes characters leave because they get written off and they die, and it's the kind of show where any character could die suddenly at any moment, but then also just sometimes like actors have conflicts, and like I think Andrew Lincoln eventually sort of left the show because he was tired of living half the time in the United States and half the time with his family in the UK.
Yeah,
but just a quick checking Max, are you I get a time check? When do you need?
You got 5 minutes. Yeah,
5 minutes. All right, great. This is I think a perfect opportunity for if any sort of closing thoughts for anything that you want to get out there that you didn't yet.
I think we've hit all of the main points. There's one small thing that it's not even related to the Aeneid, but you classics nerds will still appreciate it. At one point, Rick is debating what to do with someone they've killed. He was a bad person. And Rick goes, "We don't bury killers inside the walls."
Wow.
And yeah,
Very
like,
Roman.
oh, indeed, it is either Roman or like we're channeling Creon from the Antigone, like any number of things. But just it's one of these moments where, like, again, there is some classicist back there. He's like, yes,
Yes.
I will get these ideas into the show, and they're like, we will do this. You're like, okay,
I love that.
yeah.
Fantastic.
I don't know how much this is in the graphic novel or if this is someone in the writer's room, but God bless them, whoever they are. Yeah, absolutely. But no, that is it. Thank you all for, coming around on this, incredibly strained and thoroughly forced. Yeah.
Yep. So,
I'm convinced. I'm thoroughly convinced.
yeah, you're safe from the reception police for another day. So
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Max, thank you so much for coming on the show. If
Absolutely.
our listeners want to read or see or hear more from you, where can they do that?
Honestly, the best and most embarrassing place is TikTok, where you can follow me at Prof Maxwell, because who doesn't want to see a 38-year-old white male professor talking about stuff in 3-minute chunks? But yep, that's me. That's me at Prof Maxwell.
You are corrupting the youth in ways that we never will.
My sister has sent me some of your TikToks, and because she's like, classics, and I was like, I know him.
That's incredible. Incredible.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, as usual, listeners, you can find us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. Follow us at Dig Movies and our website, movieswedig.com. Thank you again for listening. I hope you enjoy, and we'll be back soon with both more reviews as well as more forces and strains. Thank you again, Max, and we'll see you around the bend.
Absolutely.
Bye.